Binaz shook her head, and kept doing so, whether it was because she was unable to stop herself or because it was the one small thing she could control, it was hard to tell. Haroun leaned over and held her by the shoulders, pulling her close to him. Only then did she become still. The light in her eyes dimmed. "You are not being rational. We're all in the same house. You'll see your daughter every day. It's not like she'll be going away. For God's sake." If he had meant his words to be consoling, that was lost on her. Trembling to hold back the pain ripping through her chest, she covered her face with the flat of her palms. "And who will my daughter call Mummy? What difference does that make? Suzanne can be Mummy. You'll be Auntie. We'll tell her the truth when she gets older, no need to confuse her little head now. When we have more kids, they'll all be brothers and sisters anyhow. They'll be running riot in the house, you'll see. You won't be able to tell who belongs to whom. We'll all be one big family." "Who is going to nurse the baby?" asked the midwife. "The mummy or the auntie?" Haroun glanced at the old woman, every muscle in his body strung taut. In his eyes, reverence and loathing formed a wild dance. He thrust his hand into his pocket and took out a jumble of items, a dented pack of cigarettes with a lighter tucked inside, crumpled banknotes, a piece of chalk he used for marking alterations on garments, a tablet for his upset stomach. "The money," he handed to the midwife. "For you. A token of our gratitude," he said. Tight-lipped, the old woman accepted her payment. In her experience, getting through life as unscathed as possible depended to a large extent on two fundamental principles: knowing the right time to arrive and knowing the right time to leave. As the neighbors began to pack their things, and removed the blood-soaked sheets and towels, silence filled the room like water, seeping into every corner. "We are off now," said the midwife with quiet resolve. The two neighbors stood demurely on either side of her. "We'll bury the placenta under a rose bush. And this dash," she pointed a bony finger towards the umbilical cord that had been tossed onto a chair. "If you'd like, we can throw it up on the school roof. Your daughter will be a teacher. Or we could take it to the hospital. She will be a nurse, who knows, even a doctor." Haroun considered the options. Try the school. After the women had left, Binaz turned her head away from her husband, facing the apple on the bedside table. It was rotting, a soft, tranquil decay, workingly slow. Its browning color reminded her of the socks of the imam who had married them, and how after the ceremony she had sat alone on this very bed, a shimmering veil covering her face, while in the next room her husband and the guests tucked into a banquet. Her mother had taught her absolutely nothing about what to expect on her wedding night, but an older aunt more sympathetic to her concerns had handed her a pill to pop under her tongue. "Take this and you won't feel a thing. It'll be over before you know it." During the commotion of the day, Binaz had lost the pill, which she suspected was just a paste anyway. She had never seen a man naked, not even in pictures, and, though she had often bathed her younger brothers, she suspected it was a different type of body, the body of a grown man. The longer she had waited for her husband to come into the room, the higher her anxiety had soared. No sooner had she heard his footsteps than she had blacked out, collapsing to the floor. When she had opened her eyes, it was to the sight of neighborhood women frantically rubbing her wrists, moistening her forehead, massaging her feet. There was a sharp smell in the air, of cologne and vinegar, and undertones of something else, something unfamiliar and unbidden, which she would later realize had come from a tube of lubricant. Afterwards, when the two of them were alone, Haroun had given her a necklace made of a red ribbon and 3 gold coins, one for each of the virtues she would bring to this house: youth, docility, fertility. Seeing how nervous she was, he had spoken softly to her, his voice dissolving in the dark. He had been affectionate, but also acutely aware that people were waiting outside the door. He had hurriedly undressed her, perhaps fearing she might faint again. Binaz had kept her eyes closed the whole time, sweat breaking out on her forehead. She had begun to count: 1, 2, 3, 15, 16, 17, and carried on doing so even when he had told her to stop that nonsense. Binaz was illiterate and could not count beyond 19. Every time she had arrived at the last number, that unbreakable frontier, she had taken a breath and started all over again. After what felt like infinite 19s, he had left the bed and marched out of the room, leaving the door open. Suzanne had then rushed in and turned on the lights, paying no attention to her nakedness or to the smell of sweat and sex hanging in the air. The first wife had whisked off the bedsheet, inspected it and, clearly satisfied, disappeared without a word. Binaz had spent the rest of the evening by herself, a fine layer of gloom settling on her shoulders like a dusting of snow. As she remembered it all now, an odd sound escaped her lips that could have been a laugh had it not been hiding so much hurt. "Come on," Haroun said. "It's not dash this was her idea, wasn't it?" Binaz interrupted him. Something she had never done before. "Did she just come up with this plan? Or have you two been plotting for months? Behind my back?" "You don't mean that?" He sounded startled, though perhaps less by her words than by her tone. With his left hand, he stroked the hair on the back of his right hand, his eyes glazed and distracted. "You are young. Suzanne is getting old. She will never have a child of her own. Give her a gift. And what about me? Who's going to give me a gift? Allah, of course. He already has, can't you see? Don't be ungrateful. Grateful for this?" She made a little fluttering motion, a gesture so indistinct it could have referred to anything. This situation or perhaps this town, which now felt to her like just another backwater, on any old map. "You are tired," he said. Binaz started to cry. These were not tears of rage or resentment. They were tears of resignation, of the kind of defeat that is tantamount to a loss of greater faith. The air in her lungs felt heavy like lead. She had been a child when she had arrived in this house, and now that she had a child of her own, she was not allowed to raise her and grow up with her. She curled her arms around her knees and did not speak again for a long time. Thus the subject was closed, then and there, though, in truth, it would always remain open, this wound in the midst of their lives that would never heal. Outside the window, pushing his cart up the street, a vendor cleared his throat and sang praise of his apricots, juicy and ripe. Inside the house, Binaz thought, how strange, it not being the season for sweet apricots but the season of icy winds. She shivered as though the cold, of which the vendor seemed oblivious, had slipped through the walls and found her instead. She closed her eyes, but the darkness didn't help. She saw snowballs piled up in threatening pyramids. Now they were raining down on her, wet and hard with pebbles inside. One of the snowballs hit her on the nose, followed by others, flying thick and fast. Another landed on her bottom lip, splitting it. She opened her eyes, gasping. Was it real or was it just a dream? Tentatively she touched her nose. It was bleeding. There was also a dribble of blood on her chin. How strange, she thought once again. Could no one else see that she was in dreadful pain? And if they couldn't, did that mean that it was all in her head, all make-believe? This wasn't her first encounter with mental illness, but it would remain her most vivid. Even years later, every time Binaz wondered when and how her sanity had sneaked away, like a thief climbing out of the window in the dark. This was the moment she would always hark back to, the moment that she believed had debilitated her forever.